Welcome to Coffee Cup Conversation. I'm Pastor Jeff of the church Just As You Are in Stone Mountain, Georgia. And this is hopefully the first of many broadcasts of Coffee Cup Conversation. We're continuing the conversation that we had in our service today in hopes of sharing some of the things that we've learned and the revelations that we've gotten to help others. I've asked Cheryl, who attends, and I've asked Steve to join me this morning in this conversation, kind of a conversation / rehash, as we are going through our vision goals as a community. Our vision goals are to create a safe, guilt-free environment for spiritual growth, to gather a group of believers desiring to move beyond the form of godliness to the substance of godliness, to allow our faith to transform us into radically inclusive expressions of God's love, and to create ministries that help the growth and development of the spiritual gifts. So today we're going to be talking about create a safe, guilt-free environment for spiritual growth. The idea behind the vision goals is in Proverbs 29. It talks about where there is no vision, the people perish. They cast off restraint. If you want to get real modern, it's they run naked and go crazy. And the idea of chazon, vision, can be a prophetic vision, it could be a dream or a revelation. And so we're revisiting this to keep ourselves on point and to keep ourselves focused. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was creating a safe environment. What does it take for you to feel safe?
For me to feel safe?
Yeah.
Well, I need to feel somewhere where I feel accepted, where I'm not judged.
Okay.
Where I don't have to pretend to be someone I'm not.
Do you feel safe?
Not now. In this space, and coming to Jaya, I think the first thing that made me feel safe was that it was an open forum, and I didn't feel like I was being preached to, and that I had to be a certain way. And so, for me here at Jaya, that's being safe.
And it's interesting, my concept of feeling safe has changed over the years because, well, a good example would be we just got back from Nicaragua, and when we were in Nicaragua, completely different environment, different world altogether, and I felt so safe. I mean, there was one time we were walking down the street, and there was this bank courier going down the street with a bag on his bicycle, and I thought, that would never happen in the U.S. They wouldn't make it to the bank. And yet, when we were there, whenever I saw a guard with guns, because some places, for whatever reason, would have a guard with guns out front, then I got nervous. So it was the absence of protection in Nicaragua that made me feel safe, which kind of goes back to what you're saying, because you said the acceptance. And when we feel like we're being judged or restricted, maybe it doesn't always, I don't know. What do you think?
Well, too, just
because you're the more judgy one of all of us,
right? I think it's the environment that you're in. You know, here we have structured our environment so tight, and the expectations are so high. We talked about road rage. Well, you said down there was no road rage because everybody just kind of, there was no stop signs, no stoplights. Well, here, you're supposed to obey the stoplights and the stop signs and the law. And so if someone decides they want to deviate from that, it kind of makes everybody irritated.
That's true. Because they're breaking the rules that have been laid out and are expected. Right. So it's a society thing. Yeah.
Well, I was just thinking that because when we went on a trip and we went to Jamaica, and it was the same relaxed atmosphere, but here it's not. It's very tight and stringent. You know, you have to make sure your car really stops at those stop signs, or you're going to get a ticket.
Yeah, that's true.
Or you run into.
Or you run into. Well, I like how Rory explained it. He said that it's whoever beeps their horn first in the intersection can go first.
So everybody's beeping their horns. Sounds like chaos.
Well, and actually back to what you were saying with because that was something that came up, was the idea of if they're not following the rules, we get angry, we get mad, and with road rage, I know that within myself, I'm mad at someone for driving like they're entitled, and I'm actually the one who feels that I'm more entitled than they are because they're in my way. Or they've cut me off, and what right did they have to cut me off? I'm on the road. And so it's like realizing that the things that annoy us in other people are actually probably things that we're also doing. Well, that's the removing of the judgment, though, isn't it?
It can be, I think. It just depends on the person.
Okay.
Yeah.
I made a couple notes here of what I thought it would take to create a safe place, or for us to create a safe place. One of them, and we'll see what you think of these. So in Leviticus 19, verses 33 and 34, when a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall not do him wrong. You shall treat the stranger who sojourns with you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were strangers in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. I mean, all through the Old Testament it talks about hospitality and welcoming the stranger. But I like how when God is putting this down, it says, for you were strangers. And so I made the note here, is it's seeing your story in the other. It's removing that judgment, in a sense, and realizing that I am this person and they are me.
Isn't it like there's a saying that says, I judge you by your actions, but me by my intentions.
Ooh, I haven't heard. I judge you by your actions, but I judge myself by my intentions. Because we don't know the intentions of the other,
Right.
So we just assume the intention was malice. Typically, I think when we get angry about something, we're assuming that the person's intentions were bad.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. We've talked about how, actually I think all three of us in this particular case, no diversity there, that we all grew up in very strict backgrounds, a lot of rules. And it would always assume, the assumption was that those things were evil.
Right.
And really the evil is what I place in it. The control in my life is what I place on it. So, I mean, I grew up, you couldn't roller skate because roller skating would lead to dancing.
No, it leads to falling down for me.
Well, it looked too much like dancing kind of thing. And so roller skating, and plus the roller skating rink had pinball, and pinball was considered gambling. So, but now I don't anymore, but I have roller skated. And I do play pinball. Actually, I've done
That was
other.
really good at pinball.
So, but the thing of it is, I know that my intention is not there. I know what my intentions are in those things. Kind of goes to the churches that we were raised in. I look back on it and I'm not angry about my upbringing. I'm actually, we were both talking about that earlier, I'm thankful for the legalistic environment in which I was raised, even though I'm
far from that now.
Far from that now. But it was a good foundation in my life for that point in my life. And my parents and the people that I went to church with were not bad people. They had good intentions. If I were judging them by their actions, they would be evil, restrictive people.
Right.
But if I judged them by the intentions of their love for me, I know that they just maybe needed a little more information to deal with. I don't know.
Plus, it's just a growing experience. We have to have those things in our lives to make us think, make us search the Word and find out what does God have for me compared to maybe what they think. Because maybe what they think doesn't work for me, or what they practice doesn't work for me. And I think that God works through each of us differently, and so we have to apply His Word to our lives in a way that works for us.
Like it says in James, I think it's 1:27, near the end of the first chapter, it says that the Word of God is a mirror. it's not a mirror you hold up into someone else's face and say, "Hey, Steve, this is where you're going wrong in your life."
Hasn't it been used for that though?
Well, yeah. I mean, actually, I think it's
I've
been.
used it for that.
No, I think it's more like a mirror that they've smashed over people's
Yeah.
heads.
No, they use the Bible to do that.
Well, yeah.
That's the mirror.
Yeah, that's the mirror.
I just,
Yeah, I mean, we forget that it's a very personal reflection. That's the Spirit of God convicting me, challenging me to be all that I was created to be, and to not play God in other people's lives. Because you know what, I love the idea of, for you we're strangers in the land, and it's this idea of journeying, because really that's spiritually we're all on a journey.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't always all have to go exactly take the same steps, because we're all headed for the same destination in that, as long as we just keep following the Spirit of God in our journey.
Well, isn't it like diets? People go on diets, but what works for you wouldn't work for me.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same way with our path in life, is that we're all different. If we were all the same, how boring would that be?
well, it's like being a doctor. You know, you have to kind of be your own doctor, just like you did with the situation you had with the boils, and nothing they were doing was working for you. So, and I've done that with my doctor. This isn't working, but we've got to try something else.
Try something different.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the end game is we're all headed for healing. We're all headed for losing the dead weight that's slowing us down
Mm-hmm.
spiritually. But I have to get there with my diet, and you need to get there with your healing and diet. And so but it's still the same journey, but different steps, right?
And not looking at you saying, well, you should do it my way because it works for me, so therefore it will work for you. We need to let each other be who we are and not impose things on each other. And that acceptance, that's where I feel safe, is when I'm accepted even though I may be different than you are. And that's part of what this has done for me.
Yeah, it's
And
removing
letting the
judgment.
Holy
Yeah.
Spirit guide each one
Right.
of us as He directs, and trust that that's good for you, and it's good for me, and it's good for each one of us, and not trying to impose that on others.
I mean, one of my favorite examples is when someone is a smoker. I heard this said once, and it's like, God will never bless your life unless you stop smoking. Well, then I've just played God in your life, because God may be working on your fiscal responsibility. God may be working on your self-image. God may be working on your devotion, your faithfulness, any number of things. And I've just taken your eyes off of what God's doing and what I think God should be doing, which is helping you stop smoking, which doesn't make any sense. And we do that all the time. We become the judge and jury of who we think God should be in other people's lives. And it's tough to step back and go, I don't think I would do that, but okay, God, be God in their life, and support each other and lift each other up in prayer, rather than beating each other down because we don't look the same.
Well, I think it's so much easier to hang on with people that are exactly like you, because then you can form that little clique and club, and you don't have to worry about people going outside the boundaries or seeing things that are different.
Like when the disciples were saying, hey, wait a minute, those people are healing in your name and they're not of us. And Jesus is like, if they're not against us, they're with us.
Right.
Or Jesus said, other sheep have I who are not of this fold. I mean, what he's talking about, the inclusion of people who are not exactly the same as the others. Which brings me to the next thing. One was seeing your story in the others, of realizing that our journey is the same, but also seeing the Christ in the other. And I based that on the Matthew 25, where it's the king is separating the sheep from the goats, and he says, you didn't visit me when I was, hungry, or you didn't feed me when I was hungry, and you didn't give me anything to drink when I was thirsty. I was a stranger, you didn't welcome me. I was naked, you didn't clothe me, and sick and in prison. And then the other group, he says, but you did. You did all these things. And both groups said, hey, wait a minute. When did we see you hungry, thirsty, and naked? And both groups got the same answer. As you did to the least of these, you did to me. So realizing that what we do to others we are doing to Christ, to the Christ. Seeing the Christ in others rather than, so many times I was taught, you may be the only Bible people ever see,
Oh, I
or
forget.
you may be the only Jesus people ever see. Well, what about me seeing the Jesus in them and serving God in that way? I don't know.
No,
I totally agree.
I agree with you.
I don't really.
I kind of killed that conversation, didn't I? I was like, let's drive that point home. Well, and the third one going along with that is seeing the light in the others, the light of God, but if we walk in the light as He is in the light, we have fellowship one with another.
But I think that goes with others who maybe don't even have the same belief structures as we have. Seeing the light, the good, the beauty in other people instead of seeing the negative. I remember when I was younger, I always thought, I could look in the mirror and tell you 1,000 things about myself that I don't like. But I have a hard time telling you 2 or 3 things I like. And I always thought we need to be telling people what we see that's good and wonderful. Nobody needs to be reminded of what's not good and wonderful, we know. But we need to be reminded of what's good and wonderful. And if we see that in others, then we're going to be more accepting and loving of them.
And especially the internal things, because I think too often we concentrate on the physical and the outside. Oh, you're beautiful, or you're handsome, or whatever.
Thank you.
Actually,
I take it back. and that was part of our conversation too. Is we need to be more concentrating on what's on the inside instead of what's we see on the
Right.
outside, because we can put on a good face, a good front, and still be different completely on the
I
inside.
actually said that to someone when I was praying with them. I said, "Do you know how beautiful you are?" And she looked at me and said, "I hope you mean on the inside." And I said, "No, that's exactly what I mean." And it was just, I thought that was just a wow, okay.
Well, and we've all met people that are like stunning, and then they start talking, you're like, wow,
Oh,
But and then there's the people that become just more and more beautiful the more you get to know them.
Right.
So, and seeing that light, that spark, that creation of God within them, and I really think that's where the beauty comes from. Is when we allow the Spirit of God to breathe through our lives, we allow the beauty of God's creation to shine forth through us, and it's not about makeup and perfectly matching water bottles. Okay, so that's a good one for guilt-free. So
Yes.
the other is create a safe, guilt-free environment, and that came from actually when we first started Just As You Are. It was our tagline was "Come experience the unconditional love of God without the guilt of religion." And I remember a very good friend of mine, Shai. He said, I was all excited about starting Just As You Are, and I kind of found my purpose, and I was moving forward, and I said, and we're going to say, come experience the unconditional love of God without the guilt of religion. And Shai just laughed. And I'm like, why are you laughing? He said, you can't have religion without guilt. I know, I'm Jewish. We invented both. But is it possible to have guilt-free? I mean, isn't guilt kind of a good thing? I mean, because doesn't guilt take us to the point that we need a savior? Isn't guilt, I mean, what do you think?
For our own protection, I think God built that into our conscience, that there are right things and there are wrong things. And the guilt comes into play when they're wrong, and it's a danger zone. But in the church, if I'm implying my beliefs on you and you should do it this way because it works for me, there's the guilt that we don't want in the church.
It's introspective versus non-introspective. Guilt in the sense that I'm doing something that I know is wrong for me. Let's take out the spiritual, but in the physical, I'm allergic to seafood. So therefore, if I were to go around seafood or to eat it, I would cause me harm. So I have an extreme emotion with that. Sometimes there are things in our spiritual lives that I might be able to do something you're not able to do, or you're not able to do. And so I'll have that reaction because it's to protect me. It's not to hinder you, it's to protect me.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Well, just like alcoholism, it runs pretty rampant in my family, and that's one of the reasons I don't really like to drink, because they say that it can be addictive, genetically, and so I don't need to take the chance. I really don't care for it anyway.
Well, now the noun, guilt is a noun. The definition that I have here is the fact or state of having committed an offense, crime, violation, or wrong, especially against moral or penal law, of culpability. And so I think that actually is a good guilt. I mean, I think it's that kind of guilt that motivates us to seek forgiveness. It's that guilt that reminds us that we've all fallen short in our lives, and we've all not allowed God to shape and to mold and to guide. And Romans 8:20, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God.
But not the guilt of having a matching
3:23.
water bottle.
What did I say?
Yeah, I don't know what you said.
I just said something. Yeah,
You missed it. So
What?
but
I'm
not
sorry?
the guilt of having a matching water bottle.
there is no guilt.
Just if you infer.
Yeah.
But the problem with me with guilt as a noun is that we don't let it go. Because we're collectors. And so we carry these things that have been forgiven. I'm reminded of little Johnny, that he had a slingshot and he was trying to hit a tree and just couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. And he heard the dinner bell and he was on his way home and he saw Grandma's goose. And he was playing and he hit the goose dead on and killed it. So he's like, oh my gosh, this is Grandma's favorite pet goose. And so he drags the thing by the neck and puts it behind. Too graphic, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay.
You gonna be okay?
Yeah, I'm gonna be fine.
It's a story. It's okay. And he hides it in the woodpile behind the barn, thinking, okay, I'll figure out a way. But his sister Sarah saw it happen. No, let's call her Susie. I like Susie better. So Susie saw it, and at dinner that night, Grandma said, okay, Susie, it's time to do dishes. And she said, oh, no, Grandma. Johnny just told me he wanted to help you with the dishes. And then she leaned over to Johnny and goes, remember the goose? And so he got up and he did the dishes. And then later they were watching TV and he looked over, or Grandma yells from the other room, hey, Susie, come and help me fold the laundry. And she said, what's that, Johnny? Oh, no, Johnny says he wants to help you. Remember the goose? And she did this for several days, and finally Johnny just broke because he couldn't take it anymore. He was also getting tired and had calluses on his hands. But he went to Grandma and he said, Grandma, I am so sorry. I killed your goose. I didn't know how to tell you. And she said, honey, it's okay. I was in the kitchen window, and I forgave you when it happened. I was just waiting to see how long you would let Susie guilt you. And it's that idea that God's always watching through the kitchen window. And there's a song, and I cannot remember the name of it, but there's this one line, it's not even the main line, forgiveness is right where you fell. What if redemption has stories to tell? What if forgiveness is right where you fell? But we miss it, and we carry it. And I remember that saying that said, don't judge me by my past, I don't live there anymore.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, many of us do live there.
Well, God
And
says,
we judge ourselves.
forgiven as far as the east is from the west, which never meets. So we need to remember that He doesn't hold it against us.
Yes.
I have a relative who's in jail, heading to prison, and I sat and talked with him about this because he was saying over and over how he felt so guilty about all the things that he'd done, which were horrible, and how he treated people, and that he didn't know how he could ever, make it right or feel better about it. And that kind of concept came up when I was talking to him. I asked him, I said, can you change anything that you're feeling guilty about? He brought up something in particular. I said, can you change anything in that right now? No. I said, then you need to let it go and forgive yourself. and move on. Because if you can't change it, then you can't, there is no reason for the guilt. You just have to change how you behave the next time.
Well, we like to bring up those guilts
Yeah.
to punish that person sometimes too,
Or
rather
ourselves.
than let them go, or self. But I mean, we need to let it go on both ends,
Yeah.
because all it does is cause chaos in our lives.
Maybe a good rule of thumb would be, when those guilts come up, can I change it? And is there anything more for me to learn?
Yeah.
And if you've learned the lesson, obviously are close if you feel guilty, and you can't change it, it is time to move on and to let it go and accept the forgiveness that you already have. The other definition of guilt is a verb, and it's to make someone feel judged in hopes of getting them to do something. And that's what you were talking about. It's that control and the manipulation and shaping others in our own image, rather than allowing God to shape them in God's image. And the text that I was talking about with that was Romans 14, where they were eating meat. And that was such a condemning passage for me growing up, because you shouldn't drink, because what if the weaker brethren, or you shouldn't smoke because of the weaker brethren, and it would talk about not causing the weaker brethren to stumble. And it's like, who are these people? But as I've grown in my understanding, and I'm not good, I mean, you all can read it for yourself. Go back and read it with an open and discerning heart. And I truly believe that Paul, in verse 13, says, let us stop passing judgment on one another. Instead, make up your mind not to put any stumbling block or obstacle in your brother's way. I believe that it's the passing judgment that is the stumbling block for other people. And it's that verb as a guilt. And guilt is a verb that we have. It's like, you eat meat, I don't eat meat. You esteem one day better than the other. I don't esteem one day better than the other, which is why Cheryl's planning Easter. But I wrote a note here. I said, meat was the conflict, but not the issue. Meat was not the stumbling block. Judgment, condescension, condemnation, and intolerance. The stumbling block is the guilt of religion and using it to control other people's lives. I don't know. I don't think we have that here at Just As You Are.
No, I don't either, but I thought of a myriad of times I've seen it in action. Just even, I mean, parents do that to their kids. Religious leaders do that. Bosses do that. You make people feel bad for who they are just to get them to do what you want.
Rory, who was that comedian? Do you remember the comedian that used the Bible to discipline her children?
Oh, no, yeah.
I can't.
But it was funny.
It was very funny. She'd say, pick up your socks, John 17:8. And she would throw out references to her kids. And she said when she grew up, she started looking up the references. This had nothing to do with cleaning my room.
Let's use that Bible.
It's the guilt of as a verb. That's what we're talking about in our vision statement. I don't think we need to get rid of guilt as a noun. I think we need to let it go when it's time. But guilt as a verb has no place in our lives. And the question to ask ourselves is, when have I done that to another?
And we could probably use that in good ways. Say someone's they're dieting, just say, and they're really obese, and you see them pick up that cookie or something that they know that they shouldn't have, and you just politely say, do you really want that?
Well,
And that's a form of good type of guilt, I think.
Well, and like, one of my other hats to support my church habit is that I bartend and I cut people off. Because I'm responsible in that way. So I mean, but I don't believe that my personal opinion is to create a safe, guilt-free environment. It's got to be one where people feel free to be who God created them to be, and we remove our judgment from trying to shape them in our own image and guilt them and control them, and just allow the freedom of the Spirit. And when the Spirit moves freely, it's an amazing blessing. So how many minutes do we have left? Okay, so we have any closing thoughts? We have 4 minutes.
Well, I think just along the same line, we shouldn't guilt people into trying to do something that works for us in our spiritual walk, because it may be entirely different for them. They may be in an entirely different growth period in their walk. Even though it's scriptural, doesn't mean that it's going to work for them right now. And we might encourage them in that particular aspect of whatever it is, but let's not beat them over the head with it.
Okay.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think that when we're dealing and faced with people who may be diametrically opposed to what we think, and I'll put quotes on there, we think is the truth or the right thing, is that I had a professor once that told me, don't put your religion in front. Always be a truth seeker, because people who want and know the truth are never afraid to talk to anyone who doesn't think like they think. And you have that open acceptance because you're wanting to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And always have that attitude of, hey, I really don't have a corner on the truth, so therefore share with me what you think.
Iron sharpens iron. Well, and my closing thought would be that, as Pastor Jeff, I've always felt that my calling is not to tell people what to believe, but through my life and through my words, inspire others to dig deeper. And I'm hoping that this first session of Coffee Cup Conversation has done that for you, for all, because I know that even I've been enriched in this conversation. So this is Pastor Jeff, Cheryl, and Steve signing off. May God be with you.